Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my reading review for the month of June. In the month of June, I read 13 books and quite a lot of pages. It was actually, page count-wise, my best month of the year. I think I did about 5,900 pages, roughly about that many. So my best month of the year. Not quite the best I've ever had, page count-wise, but still really good. Book number of books-wise, it was the most I've done all year. And as naturally happens when it's the summertime, I'm able to read a little bit more because work decreases. However, previous summers, I've had the whole summer off and I only have little things to do here or there. This summer, I actually worked part-time basically at my job as the teacher and administrator, so I still had a little bit more work than normal, so that's why I didn't do like 15 or 16. I also had some pretty hefty tomes on the list this month, and so that made up for having fewer books. So for this month, if we're talking about books that I rated out of 5, I had one book that I rated 2 stars. I had 2 books that I rated 3 stars. I had 6 books that I rated 4 stars, and I had 4 books that I rated 5 stars. And out of the 13 books, one of them was a reread, and the other 12 were reading for the first time. So, that being said, let's go ahead and start talking about what I read in the month of June. So, the only 2-star book, the only book that I really did not like was The Well of Souls by Ilsa J. Bick. This is one of the Lost Era books for Star Trek. I read this because we were going to talk about it on the Literary Treks podcast that I do with Casey Pettit and with Matt Rushing. That video's already out, so you can go check it out. This book is just disappointing. It's a huge book for Star Trek. You know, for Star Trek, this is pretty long, but it feels like it's 2 books smushed together. It doesn't actually have a clear identity. It has a very unlikable main character, and so in just about every way, the book just doesn't work. But it had a few moments and a few items that if they had been honed in and focused on, they would have made the book amazing. So it did have some good positives, but there were also a lot of negatives. So I gave it like 2 out of 5 stars. All right, let's talk about the 2 3-star books. The books that I thought were, it's okay. I didn't really care for, but it's okay. It's not bad. The first of those is A Knight of the Word by Terry Brooks. This is the second book in his Word and Void trilogy. This is his urban fantasy trilogy that he wrote. This was when he kind of got tired of doing Shannara and wanted to do something else. And so he created this universe and people didn't really care. So they were like, go back to Shannara. And you know what? If I had been around during this time, I would have said, go back to Shannara. So anyway, this book, it had a couple of things that were kind of interesting to me, but it wasn't as entertaining as the first book. I felt like the first book, he was honed in on what he wanted, and this book, it felt like he was just doing a second book to have a second book, and also to tell a story set in Seattle, which is, I think, where one of the places he lived. I think all 3 books in the series take place in cities that he's lived, because the first book was Chicago, this book was Seattle. I think the third book is Denver, although I might be wrong, so don't hold me to that. But I'll be reading the 3rd book next month, and hopefully it sticks the landing. So this one was like a 3 out of 5. It's okay. It's okay. All right. Next, I had my last 3-star out of 5 was the Star Trek novelization by Alan Dean Foster. This is a novelization of the 2009 movie, and Alan Dean Foster generally does not add that much to his novelizations. He pretty much just straight up tells you the story in book format. And this was a little fun. This added some context to a few things, but overall, it's a straight up adaptation, and it doesn't really add much. And some of the other Star Trek novelizations that are shorter actually add more material while still telling the story of the movie. So it was kind of disappointing. It wasn't bad. It was just okay. It was passable. You get Alan Dean Foster because you want the respectability. You don't get Alan Dean Foster because you want all the added material. All right. Next, let's get into the books that were like 4 stars, and 4 star is actually quite a long range for me because it ranges from good to great, but not amazing. But still, I feel like 4-star books for me have the widest chasm for them. So I'm starting out with the lowest of the 4 stars, and I'll go to the highest and best of the 4 stars. So I'll start with Empty Smiles, which is the 4th book in the Small Spaces Quartet by Catherine Arden. I read the first first 3 books last year and didn't read book 4 because I didn't have it until now. And I enjoyed it. I thought the first portion of this book was solid. I thought that the ideas presented in the book were great. And then partway through the book, she just went on this other direction that was like the other 3 books, and I was like, oh man, you had me going in a direction I loved, and then she just turned in. And so I didn't love the ending, but the rest of the book was actually pretty good. And for a middle grade series, I think this does a good job of being scary, but not too scary. All right, another book that I read this month is a new release. The publisher sent it to me early. I read it in the month of June, and that is Gregory Frost's Rhymer Hood. This is the second book in the Rhymer trilogy. I read the first book last year. I enjoyed it. I gave it about a 4 out of 5 stars, and I did the same thing with this one. And I actually interviewed the author last year, so check out Gregory Frost Rhymer interview Jonathan Cohn. You'll find it. And he was really interesting to talk to. But this book takes the character of Rhymer, goes forward about 100 years, and makes it as if he was Robin Hood. But it's this version of Robin Hood is fighting elves, evil elves, and it's very interesting. I enjoyed the book. I have some problems with the writing style, but the plot, characters, and story is great. All right. The next book I read that I gave a 4-star was Temptation of the Forest. This is the penultimate High Republic adult novel. This one tells kind of a love story between Avar and Elzar. I enjoyed this book. It is actually, of the adult High Republic books, it's actually my least favorite. But I still gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which tells you how good the adult books for the High Republic have been. The middle grade and YA, hit and miss, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But the adult books have all been, to me, 5 stars just about, and this is like the lowest of them. So then it shows you how good the adult books have been. But I still really enjoyed it. I still had a lot of fun with it. I actually really liked the relationship in this book. I actually thought it was really sweet and touching and refreshing for Star Wars. So, that one. I also, speaking of Star Wars, I also read a classic expanded universe book that is Jedi Trial, which is one of the Clone Wars era books by David Sherman and Dan Craig. And everyone told me I wouldn't like this book. And all the reviews online I saw for this book were negative. And so when I read this book, and I loved it, and I was really surprised by it, I was like, I really liked this book. This was a lot of fun. I can't believe that people aren't enjoying this book. And I've only read, about half of the Clone Wars era books, but of the half, this is my favorite so far. So I really enjoyed it. I still had a few problems with it, but I still generally enjoyed it. I also read one of my favorite authors, Ben Bova. He wrote the book Jupiter, and this is a great book. We're really getting into some of the great books here, but this isn't quite as good as his first Mars book or Mars Life that I read and reviewed on the channel, but it is better than Return to Mars, and I thought that this book, again, recaptures the sense of exploration, the sense of space travel, the sense of like building the space program, but this time going way in the future and seeing what it really looks like when we have space stations around Jupiter, and also deals with a first contact situation. Oh, it's so enjoyable. There's a few things I didn't like about the book, but now we're getting into really minor things. The last of the 4-star books, and this was the best of the 4-star books, I'm really surprised by, and that is So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. I was so shocked that I enjoyed this book as much as I did. The only reason I picked it up was because it's short and because I already had books 4 and 5, and I was like, you know what, I may as well finish the series, because I did not like book 3 at all. I thought book 1 was great, book 2 was all right, and then I thought book 3 was bad, and so I was like, is it really worth finishing? But I'll finish it just for completion's sake. Picked up So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. This is a fantastic book, almost on the level of how good book 1 was. The romance in this book is sweet. The story, the humor in it worked really well. It has actually a good plot, I think. So I really enjoyed So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. We are now getting into my 5-star reads. I had 4 5-star reads, and I'll talk about my book of the month in a second, but this always happens. Anyway, when thinking about 5-star reads, this next book has a caveat to it. And I'll go ahead and tell you, it's a Star Wars Path of Destruction. This was a shock read. I was not supposed to read this book, but on a whim, I was talking with my co-host of my Star Wars podcast, Two Sons of Tatooine, and I wanted to find a book geared towards him, a book that he would love. I wanted to think on every level, what is a book he will enjoy? And I picked out Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. Ironically, I know that this is not a book that I naturally enjoy reading, but I loved reading this book because I think it's a fantastically produced book. From like a following the characters and following the story, I don't like reading about the dark side, but I can recognize when you have such a good story, when you have such good writing and you do a good job, I can recognize it even when I don't necessarily like it. And I thought this was amazingly done, even though I would prefer not to be reading about dark side stuff. So, there's that book. All right, my other 5-star read is a book that I'm going to get such flack for, but that is Breaking Dawn. I loved this book. This is, I think, my favorite of the, it is my favorite of the Twilight books. I love the themes in this book. I love the characters. Everyone is going to go on, yeah, but what about that thing at the end with, that thing at the end that people complain about? It's totally different in the book than it is in the movie, and it's handled, I think, very well. And still, I love all the themes in the book. I love the payoffs. I really think that the story is really interesting. The characters are the most interesting here. I think that it has the best dynamic, the absolute best dynamic between the main trio of the series. You went from the worst dynamic in the last book to the best dynamic in this book. And so I really enjoyed this book, Breaking Dawn. All right, so my book of the month, I really came down to 2 books, and they're so close. So it's like I almost want to give it as a tie. So you could view my book of the month as 2 books this month. And since I read 13 books, I think it's fair to give it 2 books. So, but I am going to give an edge to one book. Technically, like if we're going to have to do a technical, which one is technically a better book, I have to give it to one. But just note that these 2 books are so good, they're in my favorites of the year list. So, with that being said, one of my books of the month is World Without End by Ken Follett. I started reading Ken Follett earlier this year because a bunch of YouTubers I follow say that he's the best, and I picked up Pillars of the Earth, and I loved it. That's my book of the year so far. And I picked up World Without End. And on an entertainment level, this book is one of the most entertaining books I've read. On like a character level, I just empathize with all the characters. I love the plot. I love the story. I love the feeling of the Middle Ages. I love the action that's in the book. Like, just about all that stuff I love. Some of the themes I absolutely detest, and the worldviews presented in the book I detest, and I also don't like the focus that he has on certain elements like sexuality. But the book itself, as an entertaining story, is amazingly done. And so that's why this was it had to be in contention for Book of the Month. And so, this is an all-timer of the year for me. So it's going to go down in there, which is why I had to mention it. But when it's so rare to have 2 books of the month, like 2 all-time books read in the same month. And this next book definitely deserves it. And it is John Grisham's The Testament. Oh, this is such a good book. I would say that this is my favorite Grisham book I've read this year. I've read, at this point, I think about 14 or 15 Grisham books, and it's up there in the top 5, certainly. John Grisham did an amazing job with this book. It is a legal thriller, but it also tells kind of a different story. The beginning of this book focuses more on Succession, and has elements of HBO's Succession throughout, but it also, the middle of the book turns into The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, where the main character has to go and find this woman who is a missionary in the middle of nowhere in South America, and she's totally off the grid. She nobody, not even the missionary director of the company that she works for, the religious organization that she works for knows where she is. She is totally off the grid, and yet he has to find her to tell her vital legal information. And so he has to go on this Walter Mitty journey type thing of having to go in airplanes and having to go on boats and having to fend off creatures and having to do all these things to try to find her. And then once he finds her, he has to convince her to listen to him and to react to this information that he has for her. And it's just, and the Testament, the title, is such a clever use of the title. I thought it was such a clever title. And then also I mentioned that World Without End, the themes and the worldview frustrated me to no end. This is, in my opinion, the best I've read all year of someone depicting Christianity. This is the best view of Christianity you'll see in a book. I loved the way the missionary is handled in this book. It was Wonderful. So that's why if I'm going to give 2 books of the month, it's going to go to World Without End and The Testament. And usually, so far, every month this year, it's either been a Star Trek book, I think, it's been a Ken Follett book, or a John Grisham book. So those books have been really good so far this year. So that is all of the books that I read in June of 2024. I'm hoping to do about similar reading numbers in July. But if you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. Either the reviews of these books are either currently out on the channel, or they will be out on the channel soon in the next few weeks. So look for the channel for all those. Also, tell me, did you read any books in the month of June? Let me know what you read. I will read every comment. I do not comment on every comment. I try to heart all of the, the good ones. But I will read every comment that you put in there. So let me know what you read, what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, all that stuff in the comment section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.